to get a little bit from the sugya to the, at least l'kol hapachah, is how the halacha comes out without getting to the halacha l'maisa. Today what we'll try to do is we'll try to focus more on the sugya l'halacha. The l'maisa bez Hashem, that'll come, whether it'll be hot plates, whether it'll be the blechs, etc. But let's try to get from the sugya l'halacha, what came out the sugya l'halacha. Bez Hashem, all the cases that we'll discuss, we'll use as a case study. But first, let's try to get there. We know there's a machlekes in the sugya between Hananya and the Rabbanan. Now, the shaila of the Gemara, lahachzir tznan, lishos tznan, I think that's the chelik, which we find very difficult. What basically comes down to is, how do you learn the Mishnah? And the Gemara is shakal v'tayred back and forth. Is it the hashos tznan? Is it lahachzir tznan? And the basic idea is that we're talking about a food that's Michael ben Drusai. And we need to know, in which case did the Mishnah say that it has to be garafikotim? Chananya says that the Mishnah is going lahachzir tznan. So if you're going lahachzir tznan, that means that if we'd be discussing SHIHIYA, we would not require grufa v'ketuma. That's the starting point of the sugya. At kama that it's Michael ben Drusai, for SHIHIYA, I'd have no problem. Then why is it that I require grufa and ketuma? Because the Gemara is talking about Michael ben Drusai. The Mishnah is talking about a lahachzir, a situation of chazara. For chazara, you're for sure going to need grufa and ketuma. The maskana, the halacha, what's l'maisa? What's l'maisa? If a person has a food, nageya, every single Erev Shabbos, if a person has a food which is Michael ben Drusai, it's partially cooked, it's a third cooked, it's a half cooked, it could be this in Bez Hashem. We also have to discuss if it's somewhat cooked. So do we say that once it's somewhat cooked, then we're not afraid that the fellow is going to stoke the fire? The sheet of the Chananya is that that's enough. Once it would be Michael ben Drusai, we're not afraid that he's going to stoke the fire. The sheet of the Chachamim is not like that. Like we saw last time, and like the Oilim is learning, the sheet of the Chachamim is that even if it's a Michael ben Drusai, even if it's fully cooked, calls zman that it gets better on the fire, it's what's called mitztamik v'yafalai. With that itself, we have to learn up one day what goes into mitztamik v'yafalai, nechulei. Because man that it's considered mitztamik v'yafalai, then even if it would be fully cooked cholent, it gets better and better, then we're afraid you're going to come to stoke. Last time we explained the svaras. Maisa, the Balatanya in Sivches, when he explains the sheet of Chananya, he says, Nisbashal k'Michael ben Drusai, if it was Nisbashal before Shabbos, k'Michael ben Drusai, ein locha shlichito, you don't have to worry about the stoking. Shaf beloy chito, even without stoking, it'll get cooked. The vidagraz, the pshat is, it's because you're not worried, because it's going to wind up getting fully cooked, because it's already halfway there, so you'll know it'll get fully there. That's one way to learn. The hainu lefi that mahalach, the pshat is not that he's willing to eat it, half cooked, the third cooked, but that he's not worried because it's going to get there. That's one mahalach. Look at the Mishabura and Sivkot Lamed Zayin. He seems to say a different mahalach. The came in the nispashal sheroi lechal ayidei chak. Since right now it's in a position of where you're able to eat it, leka lemecha shem yichate. You don't have to worry that such a thing is going to be mechate because it's edible. Lama yichate bechinam. Why would he be mechate for no reason at all? So therefore, Chananya is mekel. However you cut it, if it's a third cooked, a half cooked, Chananya is mekel. Who paskins like Chananya? Says very interesting. This is where we're going to start today. Bez Hashem, the Olam saw, probably the Rosh, and we'll see today the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, the Bir Halacha, the Chseinish. How do we paskin this shaila? And it's a mamish, a very, very negay shaila. We'll see that to make a blech in a crack pot is not an easy thing, but even a very simple case. Every Friday night, it's the summer now. You don't want to leave on your oven. I don't know if the summer reached New York yet, but it certainly has come to the Middle East. So you don't want to leave your oven. You don't want to leave your hot plate on the whole entire Shabbos. So Friday night, what do you want to have? You want to have chicken, some potato kugel, whatnot, and you decide you'll leave it in the oven, and then your oven's going to go off naturally in an hour or something like that. You'll put it on a timer, and then after an hour, it'll go off, which means that the first hour of Shabbos, your oven is going to be on, and you want to keep it like that. Do I need to have something in my oven, some form of a blech or some form of a what we call grufa and ketuma? Or can I say, look, by the time that Shabbos comes in a normal home, the chicken, the potato kugel, whatever it is certainly a half cooked, a third cooked, whatnot. And now I'm going to leave it in the oven, which the oven is a normal cooking apparatus. And my question is that lefi the shitas rabban the chachamim, maybe a potato kugel is mitztamik v'raloi, but a chicken is a mitztamik v'yafaloi. So if a chicken is mitztamik v'yafaloi, so then I have my chicken in the oven, and I want to know, can I leave it there without doing anything? I just leave it there, and in an hour and a half, it'll go off because it's already a third cooked, a half cooked. Lefi Chananya, you don't have to do anything. It's a half cooked, it's a third cooked. You put it in the oven. You could leave it like that. Aren't we afraid he's going to start monkeying with the knobs? So Chananya is not afraid, either because he'll eat it like that, b'diavad, or because it's going to get cooked anyways by the time the Shabbos comes in. And Rabbi say, the Chachamim would hold the Ch'oira in this case, that would be Asr. And even if before Shabbos it was fully cooked. Why? Because the Maisa, I have in there the chicken, I have whatnot. So then in such a case, even if it's fully cooked, but when you stoke it and you'll add heat and fire and whatnot, it's going to be better. It's going to taste better. It's going to get mitztamik, the yafalai. So maybe we have to be chayshit that he's going to stoke the flame. Now, the truth is, Rabbi say, there's a big shaila that I just threw in, which is not our sugi right now. Maybe you'll say that if one of the items is mitztamik v'ralo and one of the items is mitztamik v'yafalai, so maybe the etzim fact that he has one thing that if he stokes, it's going to get ruined. Let's say the potato kugel gets dried out. So then maybe that'll prevent him from stoking even the entire. Well, but let's don the shiloh differently. Let's say he has chicken, which is certainly geschmack. It'll get better and better if you stoke, or he has a roast on a Friday night and he doesn't want to leave on a hot plate for the whole Shabbos. And he wants to know, can I just put it in the oven? It's fully cooked, but certainly it's mitztamik v'yafalai. Lefi the chachamim, it should come out that this is also, you can't leave it in your oven on Friday night, even though it's fully cooked. But if you would stoke it, it's going to get better and better. And lefi chananya, it's going to be mutter. Now we'll see, because you make a blech in an oven, etc. But in the meantime, I don't have blechs in my oven. I'm not holding by the inserts of the haim. And now I want to know, can I leave my roast in the oven on Friday night or not? So this is our machlekes. Chananya seems to say that you could, as long as it's a half cooked, a third cooked. And the Rabbanan seem to say that you can't, because even though it's fully cooked, but mitztamik v'yafalai is a problem, because we're afraid you're going to come to stoke it to make it better and better and better. So how do we paskin la'locha? Now, l'maisa, in the shlav of the Rishonim, it's a very, very large machlekes to say the names are very scary on both sides. When you look in the Chananya, in the sheet of the Chananya, it seems to be that many of the Geoinim paskin like Chananya. Very interesting. You don't often find this. We know usually what the shitas of the Rishonim are, but here we know that the sheet of Rav Hai Goin, and it's brought by the Rashba and Daf Lamed Ches, he brings the Rif as a raya, and he's doicha the raya of the Rif, and Rav Hai Goin posak halacha kiman da'omer lahachzir tznan. And therefore, if it's already Michael ben Drisoi, it does not need a blech. This was the psak of many of the goyinim. This is the psak of Rav Hai, Rav Shrira goyin, Rav Tzadik goyin, the Behag. And the truth is, anyone who learns the sugya, this is the psak of Rabbeinu Rashi HaKodesh and Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. Rashi Dibra Maskal v'Rav. He says what we do. V'anon. This is what we do over here in France. Anon the Mashinan Kedera Gabe Kira, which is Nakrufa Adechananya Samchinon. Where do you have a psak from Rashi? How many people? How can you count on your hands, Rabbi? I know there's one in Chulin. There's a few. You can count on your hands where Rashi says a psak halacha. Rashi over here, it's actually a few in Chulin. Rashi says we do like Chananya because it's stam masnisin kevase, and the way they learn. This is the sheet of Toisvis. Where's Toisvis? Taka Rabbi say not just on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph and Dibra Matzchol Oilam. This is the sheet of Toisvis in Dav Yud Ches Amud Beis. And this is the sheet of Rabbeinu Tam. You know the whole Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam Mishpacha. You know that they had that roast in the oven. And when I say oven right now, it's a loose translation. But I don't want to get involved in ovens and kiras and whatnot. But no matter what, if you have a Michael ben Drisoi dig a food, Hakol Mutter, because there's no fear of a chitui. Once it's Michael ben Drisoi, wherever you're going to put it, there's no fear of chitui because he has no meat to milchata. Either I'll eat it like that, or it'll come to the cooking on its own. This is the sheet of the Balei Toisus in the Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri. And this Lamaisa, even a lot of the Svardish Gedolim paskin like this. This was the sheet of the Rashba. This is the sheet of the Ritva and the Sugin Daf Lamed Zayin. He brings here the Riazak and the Rabbeinu Tzarfat, the Raz Halevi, Poiskin Kechananya. And this is Lamaisa, the sheet seemingly of the Torah, The Torah brings down in Sif Aleph in our Siman Reish Nun Gimel, Lezeh Hiskim Adoni of Yarosh, which makes sense. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Tam, the Bali Toisesim, and the Talmidim of the Rosh, the Ozarua, Rabbeinu Yeruchim. We know that when the Rosh had to leave Spain, unfortunately when they had to leave France, when they burnt the Torah in 1242, when that Rasha Louis Machshemai, when he burnt the Halakha Torah, so then the Rosh got nervous and he said, "Look, we gotta codify the law," and that's when all of the Talmidim of the Rosh, it's the Rosh, the Torah, the Ozarua, the Rabbeinu Yeruchim, they all made what we have today as the halacha set over because they were afraid there's no more Gemaras. So all of those Talmidim, Rabbeinu Yeruchim and the Ozarua, they all paskin like the Shita of Chananya. And as far as the Rishonim are concerned, it's an overwhelming majority. Mitzat Sheni, on the other side, that paskins like the Chachamim, is mamish very high up on the level of Psak Halacha. This is the Rif and the Rambam. The Halakha Rambam in Perikim Halacha Dalid, he says, Tav shel shalei bashal kol tzarcha v'chamin shalei huchma kol tzarcha no tav shel bishal kol tzarcha. Calls man shemitztamik v'yafa ein machin al gabe ha'esh, even though you did it miboid yoin. He paskins like the Chachamim. The rayas, you can go back and forth. The Rif really has about 5 rayas. He brings a raya from the Ebayis Eima. I'm afraid to go into the sugi over here, but he brings a raya from the Iboya of Samach, from the Shail of Samach. He brings a raya from the Braisa, from Avishia. He brings rayas upon rayas. The Ran and many Rishonim answer those rayas, but in halacha, it's a major machlekes. So the Beis Yosef has a klal. He has the big 3. The Rif, the Rosh, the Rambam, and that's how the Beis Yosef paskins halacha. He paskins with the big 3. If you have 2 out of 3, so then you paskin like the 2 out of 3. So you know over here what's going to probably happen, that the Beis Yosef is going to want to paskin the Rif, the Rosh, the Rambam. It's going to be the Rif and the Rambam against the Rosh. So the Nizam is going to paskin like Chachamim, which means in our case that you have the chicken on the roast on a Friday night, and it's in the oven, and you don't want to keep on the hot plate the whole entire Shabbos. The Shita of the Chachamim, which is the Rif, the Rambam. And really, we'll see in a moment, that's premise what the Beis Yosef seems to say, is going to be that you cannot leave it in the oven on a Friday night. You have to go and do something to show that you're not in the cooking process. How to do that, we're going to have to learn. But you wouldn't be able to just leave the roast, mitzad the fact that I'm not going to stoke. That's the sheet of the Rif, the Rambam, and Bemis, the Ramban paskins like that. And that is a Amaradik Machlekes. The Rosh and the Bali Toisesim and the Ashkenazim are the Talmidim of them. So they seem to say that no, once it's already Michael ben Drusai, you paskin like Chananya, Genukshoin. The big controversy is Sviv, the Shita of the Rosh. So let's start. That'll be our starting point over here. Is what is the Shita of the Rosh? Come to gain the Rosh in Perek Gimel and Seif Sif Aleph, and the Rosh says these words. After he brings down the big Machlekes, Chananya, the Rabbanan, he says, "Ubishvil sherabu adayis b'hai Pesach." Now that this has become a tremendous machlekes in shitas, like you just saw, dapim of Gemara, machlekes im Amoraim, Tanoim, machlekes Geoinim, Rishonim, Rif Rambam against the Toisus in the dust. So the Rosh says these words. He says it's a tremendous machlekes. So he writes, and mitzad sheni klal Yisrael odik in the midst of Oynik Shabbos, v'lo yishmu lahachmir. They will not listen to us if we tell them to be machmir. So he says, leave them to their minig that they paskin like Chananya. And in my case, you have to understand, Rabbi Yisai, in those days, it was really a big shasat chak. They cooked on barbecues, coals of that nature. And now, comes Erev Shabbos, you don't want the food to burn. You don't want the food to be undercooked. It was a chachma. Everybody here knows. When you make that barbecue, it's always that one uncle that knows how to make the barbecue. The problem is that everybody thinks he's that one uncle. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. So they had this problem Erev Shabbos. So the eighth of this out of here was to go and tell the Yid that he should go and make the food fully cooked and then take it off, and then his food is going to be cold. Or to go and make the food fully cooked and then do some type of grifa, some type of covering of the coals, and do like the chachamim, do some type of covering of the coals, which of course would be a ketuma. But then if you did it not right, so then it might burn. If you do it too right, so then it's going to be cold. So the best thing is if I could just say, look, leave it on the coals, even when it's fully cooked, even when it's Michael ben Drusai, and then the mela, by the time Shabbos comes, it'll still be hot, it'll be gishmak, it'll be cooked. It was much easier to do like the Chananya, in order to have nice geschmack of food for Shabbos. And Klal Yisrael are odik in the mitzvah of Oynik Shabbos. So Mamela says the Rosh, leave them alone, they're odik in the mitzvah, and they do like Chananya. Those are the words in the Rosh. This Rabbi Isai, how do you learn this? And the emes is very interesting, is that the Svardim, the Kav Chaim brings down, that the Svardim over here, even though we'll see in a moment, the Mechaber Shita, they also seem to have had this problem. Because even the Svardim are going to say that even though the Rif and the Rambam are going to be paskening that if it's fully cooked or if it's half cooked or fully cooked, but once it's mistamik v'yafala, you still need to do something like a group of a ketuma. And the Svardim seem to be also adik in the midst of Oynik Shabbos, and they also seem to have this problem. They also seem to want to pasken like Hananya, Lakula, that once it's already half cooked or a third cooked, it's already going to be enough to leave on an open flame. So the Maisa, what's the Etzim Psak Halacha? What's the Psak Halacha? So before we explain the Rosh, let's go first to the Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef in Siv Katan Aleph, he says what you would have expected. He says, Mikol Makam Lotzis Yidei Kol Safek. I mean, even though the Beis Yosef knows it's a Rif and a Rambam, and Rif and a Rambam should win, but he knows there's Geoinim and there's all the Bali Toisim, and it's very scary. It's the Rashba, Ritva, all the Rishonim, a lot of the Rishonim seem to paskin, not like the Rif and the Rambam. So he says, just get out of the Shaila and Nachon lahanig yasimu chatichas basar chai. Go and do some other eitzah, which is to do what's called kidra chaisa, which we'll learn about. That once a person has some type of a raw food, then he shows us he's obviously not involved in the cooking process, because if something is raw, no matter how much he's going to stoke, it's not going to become ready. So the Mela, he gives you an eitzah to get out of the shaila because he doesn't want to get involved in being mekel. The Begai Govna, everyone's mekel. But in the end of the day, if you want to know what's the psak of the Beis Yosef, so when you look inside the Sefer Shulchan Aruch, in the Sefer Shulchan Aruch, he brings stam yesh oimrim. Stam is the sheet of the Rabbanon, that even when it's fully cooked, if it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, then it's no good. You have to do something. You have to do something to the fire. Grufa, ktuma. That's how he brings down the stam. V'yesh oimrim. He brings down the sheet of Chananya, that once it gets half cooked, the third cooked, so then you don't need to cover the flame. Stam Yeshayim says the Mogen Avram Nechem and Moshe the Maimon Mordechai in Simin Reish and Dalet Tzivkot and Zayin. He says, Ech Kosav Moran Din Ze Bestam. He asks a question that in Reish and Dalet over there it discusses a case where he has fruit and it's already be'etzim, fruit is edible raw, and he has a case over there where he says that you're allowed to take the fruit and put them on the fire, on an open fire. Frankly, Maimon Mordechai, you paskined in Reish Nun Gimel that like the Shitas Rabbanan, and that if something is mitztamik v'yafalai, you're going to come to stoke. You're going to come to stoke. Over there in Reish Nun Daled, he paskins when it comes to a case of fruit, that even though fruit is edible raw, he paskins over there it's mutter. Excuse me, because it's edible raw. So the Maimon Mordechai asks the question: you already were soisim in Reish Nun Gimel, like the Rif, like the Rambam, and you already paskins that it's usher. Even if it's edible already, it's usher because you'll come to stoke to make it better. So why don't you say the same thing by an apple that you put next to the fire? You shouldn't be allowed to put an apple on the fire on an open flame, because it's true, it's edible now, but you might come to stoke to make it more geschmack. So you can answer that kasha and you can explain there's a difference between something which is half raw and something which is totally edible as a raw product, and everyone eats it as a raw product. Maybe even the Chachamim will agree. Okay, but what do you see from the Maimon Mordechai? You see, like the Mogen Avram, like the Chemed Moshe, that the psak of the Shulchan Aruch is stam yesh oyimim. The psak is like the Chachamim, and therefore the chayra which should come out is that the Sfardim have to be machmir, and that if they would have that case of the oven that we described, they would not be able to leave it in on Erev Shabbos without doing something to it, because it's mitztamik v'yafaloi. And this is the psak, this is the way the Bir Halacha learns the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. The Bir Halacha in Sif Aleph in our Simin and Dibur Maskov and Nagu, also in Shar Tzion, in Reish Nun Dalet Tzivkot and Chov Beis, he says the Beis Yosef was marich on the 2 days. He brings the Rosh and he says a lashon. He says v'keina Beis Yosef gufa mimashe hitik day rishonim b'stama, and the day shniya as a yesh ayimim shows that obviously the Shulchan Aruch is machmir like the shita the Chachamim. Now I'm marich on this Rabbi side because the Minchas Koyin in the Mishmeres HaShabbos and Shar Sheni and Parakei Ois Dalid has it sad to learn that even the Beis Yosef is Mekel. Hinei yesh lachiach from the Marik that he holds like Rashi, and he says even though incineration in Gimel, he says lo yachriya kamaisai, but he was machriya in Rishon and Dalet, Sif Dalet. So this is maybe a shaila how to learn the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. Do you say that Rishon and Dalet, where it talked about the case of an apple, and over there the Shulchan Aruch says you could leave it on an open flame, is a raya that he's pasking like Chananya? Or are you going to make a chilik and explain that over there, obviously there's something different, and over there, even the Rif and the Rambam are going to agree that if you have an apple, then even they're going to agree since it's totally edible and people eat it like this legamre, so we're not afraid of stoking. Are you going to answer the shaila, or are you going to say that it's a raya that Itaka Paskins like Hananya? I would say that most Svarim take on not like the Minchas Kayim and learn that the Shulchan Aruch's psak is taka like the Rabbanim. That's a sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, but like I mentioned, the Kaf HaChaim, others, Chav Chaim Sivkat and Chav Zayin, he says Lemaisa, the minig is lahakol, like we'll see in a moment. The minig is like Hananya. So it seems to be even the Svardim are going to have some basis to perhaps be Mekel. This is the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. Comes again the Ramah with very interesting words. He says, "V'nogu lahakel." Ramah says in Sif Aleph, which the Olam probably saw, that the minig is to be mekel. Kloimar, the minig is like Hananya, and then in our case of the oven, you would be allowed to put the food in as long as it's half cooked or a third cooked. This is the minig. What's the pshat in this Ramah? Nogu lahakel, nogu lahakel. So the Maisa, that's what should come out, I guess. The Ashkenazim are going to be mekel, and maybe even some Sfardim are going to be mekel. But certainly for an Ashkenazi, we know if the Ramah writes the words v'nagel lahakol, and you see this mamish 20 Rishonim Goinim and everyone that Bali Toisis that seemed to, and Rashi HaKadosh that seemed to be mekel. So l'chayra, we could be mekel. And if somebody's going to tell me I don't want to keep on a hot plate on Shabbos, you can tell them. So you can rest assured, you could feel like a lichatchila deka yid. You could do like the Ramah. So if the Ramah's mekel, nagel lahakol, it's a minig also. So then why do you have to feel guilty? You'll put the roast in the oven on Erev Shabbos, even though it's fully cooked, half cooked, whatever it is, but as long as it's somewhat cooked already, half cooked, so then even though it's mitzvah v'yafaloi, you'll be allowed to do it, and then in an hour and a half, the oven will go off on a Shabbos clock, and then you'll have a cool Shabbos, and gezinta eight, you'll eat food, gishmaka food. This is the chayra. The emes is that when you look in the achreinim, so it does sound like that many achreinim went, at least for the Ashkenazim, that you could be mekel like Hananya. The Levush brings down the noyegin lahakel. The Minchas Koyin certainly went like that you could be mekel. The Balatanya and Sif Tes says kvar nispashet the minute lahakel. The minute is to be mekel. The Aruch HaShulchan in Rishon Tes Sif Tes Vav says anachnu toisim like Rashi toisvis that it's mutter even if it's not gar if it cut them in if it already reached Michael ben Drusai by the night. This is the shita seemingly of the Aruch HaShulchan. And we'll see in a moment, this is really the sheet of the Chazaynish in Siman Lamed Zayin Sif Gimel, Anin Nagina Lahakel, where Mekel, like it says in the Ramah and Rishon and Gimel. The Mogen Avram over here opens the door for us to perhaps go back and to understand the Rosh, and to try to figure out what's the pshat in this Rosh, that the Rosh was Mekel, and he went with the Bali Taisis. The Mogen Avram already opens up the door, in Tivkat and Tezvav, this is the way the Prima Gadim learns the Mogen Avram, and he says, a Lashon of bechai legamrei mutter, if it's totally raw, kidra chaisa, so then it's mutter. And then he says, vimkein mutter v'lahoyshiv hakderis batoner samach l'chshecha. He says, try and do an eitzah of start the cooking process like right before Shabbos. Why is the Mogen Avram saying that? Do like Hananya, go and get it half cooked and a third cooked, whatever. And then what's the problem? We paskin like Hananya. It's already a little bit intriguing. So the Prima Gadim says, no, he's not so happy with paskening like Hananya. Now, what's this all about? So, comes again the Bir Allah over here. And the Bir Allah and Dibra Maskov and Nagu says, we have to figure out what was the makor of this kula of the Ramah. So the Bir Allah over here explains, he says, look, read the words in the Rosh. The Rosh says that, there's many shitas, and if we'd want to be machmir, layishmalanu, they wouldn't listen to us. So comes again the Bir Alacha, and he says something that seems to be pashit. He says, look, the Beis Yosef was marich and many shitas. And the Rosh says, Klal Yisrael odik, and they won't listen to us. So leave them alone. Mashma, it's only because he didn't want to be moicha. The Rosh didn't want to be moicha. Like he learns kivyachol that the lashon is hanach lehem. We know in Shas sometimes it says hanach lehem. Hanech lehem. Leave Klal Yisrael. They know what they're doing. So sometimes it's Hanech lehem. They know what they're doing. They're Nevi'im, Ben Nevi'im, Lashon of the Gemara. So that means leave them. They're doing the right thing. Sometimes it's Hanach lehem, Hanach lehem. Leave them alone. Mutiv she'shoigigim v'al yumezidin. What's the pshat in the Hanach lehem, the Hanach lehem of the Rosh over here? Is the Rosh saying they know what they're doing, leave them alone, and they're doing the right thing by paskening like Hananya? Or is the Rosh saying, listen, Hanach lehem, they're not going to listen to us, which is his lashon, la yishmu lanu, and therefore Hanach lehem, la yishmu lanu, and mutav she'shayigim. Oh, says the Biur Halacha, I think it's more of a gather that they're not listening to us, and but if you are yes going to listen to us, Mikol Makom, we don't have the ability to be moicha, but says the Biur Halacha, it's toiv lahachmir. Comes again to Biur Halacha, and it's a murdik azach. He says lechatchila bevadai, not just it's toiv, but bevadai toiv vizoyer, that the food just fully cook it, take it off the fire legamri before Shabbos, wrap it up, and don't get involved in the whole entire shaila. Azoi seems to be the psak of the Biur Halacha. The hainu, the Biur Halacha is opening us up to a new shita. We saw the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch was l'chayra stam yeshoyim, paskins like the Chachamim, like the Rif and the Rambam. The sheet of the Ramah, we would have thought, is like the Lavush says, and like the Aruch HaShulchan says, and like many of the Rishonim, the Goyinim say, which is Nagul HaKol, the Minig Yisrael, and therefore be Mekel. Now we have a middle sheet, the sheet of the Biur Halacha, the way he learns the Rosh Umemela, paskins la'alacha. That there's a middle sheet, toiv la'achmir. So if someone now asks me the shaila with the case of the oven, it's unbelievable. We're mahapech hayotzros here. If he's a Sephardi, I'm going to tell him the Sephardim, even though they should have done like the Shulchan Aruch, but the Kaf HaChaim says the minig of the Sephardim is to be mekel. So I guess I'm going to tell him minig is to be mekel. I don't know. But then if he's going to ask me, I'm going to tell him, but you're an Ashkenazi. He's going to say, yeah, an Ashkenazi. So I could do like the Ramah and tell him, yeah, it's nice. The Ramah says that. But the Biur Halacha says, toiv la'achmir. You want to do it. You want to be a Mishnah Berurah Yid. So now it comes out a third shita. Seems to be that the way the Biur Halacha learned the Rosh is that toiv la'achmir, and if he asks me the shaila of the Rosh, I'm going to tell him, no, you should leave your hot plate on Shabbos, and it's better, I guess, to be hot over here than to be hot down there. Not chalila that it's going to be hot down there, but at least it's a toiv la'achmir. Toiv la'achmir. L'chayra. Over here at Beisai, it's very intriguing. The Chazon Ish, he says, I don't think that that's the pshat b'chlal. The Chazon Ish over here in Siman Lamed Zayin Siv Gimel, he says, I don't think that's the pshat. If you read the Rosh, I don't think that's what he's saying. Now, before I continue, I want to read you what I saw in the Das Torah in our Siman, a Davar Nifla. The Das Torah in Dibra Maschel Hine brings down a Murdik Maisa. He says, listen, the Ramah says v'nogu. Everybody say, you ever wonder sometimes the Ramah says the word nogu am, nogu, v'keinai hagin. Sometimes, there's a difference in the Lashonis. So Das Torah tells us a very interesting thing. He tells us that there's a makna that asks a question. The makna is in Even Ezer and Siman Samach Daled. The makna asks a shaila that we know there's a minig Yisrael, and this minig Yisrael is brought down in Even Ezer and Siman Samach Daled by the Helik Ramah, that we don't get married. I'm not saying also to get married, but there's a minig to not get married in the end of the Chodesh. And then when do you get married? In the beginning of the Chodesh. What's the pshat? Because that's when it's a good mazel for Klal Yisrael. The Levana is on its way up. Klal Yisrael's Nimshal Levana. And we know that many people, they try to get married dafka in the beginning of the month. Some have different months that the Hanhaga doesn't apply. Those months are perhaps good mazel for Klal Yisrael, like Tishrei, whatnot. Okay. There is a minig like this brought down in the Helik Ramah. In fact, the Makna Kasha says, how could you say there's a minig to get married in the beginning of the month? And the minig is to not get married at the end of the month. So you're telling me that in every single month, the minig is don't get married at the end of the month. I'm sorry, fact the Makna Kasha. So why in Hilchos, the Drivachim, in the halachas of the 3 weeks, it tells me don't get married from Shivasar B'Tammuz and onward. Of course, don't get married from Shivasar B'Tammuz onward. You can't get married from Shivasar B'Tammuz onward because you don't get married at the end of the month ever in any month. What's meyuchid about the 3 weeks in the Drivachim that we don't get married in the 3 weeks from Shivasar B'Tammuz, till at least Rosh Chodesh Av? That part is pashit. I anyways would never get married at the end of the month. As I affect the Makna. Comes again the Makna, he says, I'll tell you a Klal Gadol. And he says, I'm telling you this Klal Gadol from the Ramah himself. The Ramah himself tells you sometimes the words v'nogu, sometimes he says v'kein hagim, and it means something. Every drop of ink in the Heilig Ramah. Derech Agav, I just remembered. Rabbi Yankiv Zichron Levracha, I think he said over that, in the capital in Kallus, it says ace this, ace that, ace l'spoid, ace l'vkoid, ace l'irkoid. So the 15th is ace l'chabek, and the 16th is ace loy l'chabek. This haste till the 15th l'chabek. Till the 15th you can get married. From the 16th on, you don't get married. Remez ladavar. Akopanim, but the Ramah says sometimes noyigim v'kein nogu yeshlinoy. So he says, what's the difference? It depends. If it's a minig that he likes, he says v'kein hagim. That's a minig you should do. We know that the Ramah was mamish the kpeda the Ramot Gahat and the minig Yisrael was tremendous. So that's a minig that you should do. But sometimes it says v'nogu ha'am. So when it says v'nogu, the Ramah himself in Tshuva Ramah writes, when I say that, I mean, I'm not saying that this is what you should do. I'm telling you, this is what the Klal Yisrael does. Oh, says the Das Torah, the B'jana, over here, the Dvarim HaMeirim. He says over here, Be'emes, the Ramah is coming from the Rosh. And the Rosh is saying, this is the Nagu Yisrael, the Minig Yisrael. He's not saying you should do it. He's saying, Begeder Mutiv Sheishoigigim V'alim Mezidin. Again, like this type of idea, like we're saying from the Bi'alacha. So if a Yid would ask, should I do this minig? We would tell him, look, you want to be a mutav sheishoigigim if you're asking, so then it's not kedai. It's certainly toiv lahachmir. It's bevadai lechatchila to do like the chachamim. And even when the food is fully cooked, what should you do? You should taka grufa, ketuma, or like the bi'alacha, take it off of the fire. But al kapanim, you should not rely on chananya. That's what comes out. Comes again the Chazai Nish Rabbi Yisai, and says he didn't learn the Rosh like that. Now, I must tell you a certain idea, and I want to explain my idea for a moment. You're going to find in the halachas of SHIHIYA, Chazara, you're going to find in the Chazai Nish a lot of kulas. Now, I'm not saying that the Chazai Nish made his kulas based on a certain chumrah that he had, but it certainly worked out good for the Chazai Nish. Kimoi Lahavdil, where you find in Shemitah that the Chazai Nish was against, like all the Gedolim, but the Chazai Nish was the one that was the most emphatic and explicit and wrote about it, was against Het Mechira. And he said, what are you telling me that you need to come on to Het Mechira because otherwise they're not going to be able to live, etc. And then he went on to make a lot of kulas in Hilchos Shemitah. And he shows you you're able to live as long as you learn Hilchos Shemitah, Hilchos Shvius properly. Now, I'm not saying it's one caused the other, but you could use your imagination. The Chazai Nish didn't have a blech. So you're going to find a lot of times the Chazai Nish is going to have major problems because what we call a blech, the Chazai Nish held as a fire gummer, not a blech. So by say, you come Erev Shabbos, you want to take your food and put it on the blech. According to the Chazai Nish, you're not putting it on a blech. There's no such thing as a blech. You're putting it on an open fire. We'll see. The Chazai Nish had maybe some type of a blech if you take it and lift it up with bricks and whatever. But what the oilam over here does with the blech, puts a piece of metal on the fire, the Chazai Nish held that's not called a blech. So now the Chazai Nish has a very big problem. How are you going to go and put food if you're going to have to be machmir? Like Neged Chananya. So now we have a problem. Even a blech, I can't put my cholent half cooked, third cooked, even fully cooked. Because I'm machmir like the Rabbanan. If you're going to tell me mutav sheishoigigim, and in Bnei Brak you want to do a lechatchila, avada, and you don't want to be included in the mutav sheishoigigim. So they came to the Chazai Nish and they said, Rebbe, if you're going to tell me I don't have a blech, so then I can't take my cholent, even if it's fully cooked, and put it on my blech, because you're calling that's an open flame. So then how am I going to have cholent? I can't leave it on Shabbos, and you're telling me lechatchila I should do like the sheet of the Rabbanan. So the Chazai Nish told them, I don't know what you mean. Once it's a half cooked, the third cooked, I pass in legamre like the Ramah, and the Ramah's the minig, and I don't think you should be machmir. What do you mean? Isn't the Ramah coming from the Rosh? He says, read the Rosh again. He said, that's not pshat in the Rosh. What the Rosh doesn't mean mutav sheishoigigim. Like I mentioned before, there's 2 times that we find in Shas the Lashon hanech lehem. He says it doesn't mean here hanech lehem mutav sheishoigigim. It means hanech lehem, they know what they're doing. What's the pshat? So he explains, over here, there are many machmirim. The Rif, the Rambam, he says even the Shiltis. So in the Klale halacha, even if we'd want to be makel, because there are many shitas that are makel, but we should have said, so many poiskim are machmir, why not? Tashayla Hilchos Shabbos, why not? Be machmir. Not that that's the din, But why not? Why not be machmir? Roy la'achmir, to not get involved in the shaila. That's how he reads the Rosh. Why not? It's right to be machmir, to not get involved in the shaila. But he says, since over here it's going to come out bittul oinik Shabbos, says the Rosh. This is the way the Chazon Ish learns the Rosh. Since over here it's going to come out a bittul of the oinik Shabbos. You can't say why not. I'll tell you why not. Because sometimes I'm going to be machmir, like a shita that you're telling me is not the ikra din, and as a result of that chumrah, you know what's going to happen? I'm not going to have a geshmak chalent. So now I have a reason to go with the normative halacha. Kloimar, the normative halacha is to be makel. But why not be machmir? It doesn't hurt. It says that, no. Klal Yisrael are odik in Oinik Shabbos and they want to have geshmak of food. So I lose out by being machmir. Your chumrah is a kula. What are you saying? Why not be machmir? Because then you're going to be makel in Oinik Shabbos. What did the Vilna Gaon say? The Gaon said, I heard from Rapam Zichron Levracha that I ate kneidlach on Pesach. Why did the Gaon eat kneidlach on Pesach? Why wasn't he machmir on Gebraks? It's a chumrah of Gebraks. No, because it's a chumrah in Oinig Yontif. The Gaon liked kneidlach. The ones asked the Gaon, how come he wears Rashi tefillin all day long? Why not Rabbeinu Tam? It's a chumrah at least. So he says, what do you mean? If I'm going to be machmir like Rabbeinu Tam, it's a kula in Rashi, because I'm going to lose out a few moments on the ikra halacha of the shita of Rashi. So sometimes your chumrah is a kula. It's a mishkol chasidus, like the Mesilas Yesharim says in the 19th parak. So over here also, you're going to go and say, be machmir, and do like the Rif, the Rambam. Why not? What's the big deal? I'll tell you what the big deal is. I'm going to wind up not having geshmak of food for Shabbos. That's the pshat in the Rosh. Oh, as I bezoi, if that's the pshat in the Rosh, says the Chazon Ish, we could be makel. So now we shouldn't be machmir. He says, L'chein hanechlem, and let them do like their rebellion. Ve'efsher ein lahachmir. And not only that, don't be machmir, because the Geonim themselves weren't machmir. And what are you, firmer than them? You're firmer than the Geonim? Says the Chazon Ish, don't be machmir. Oh, it's a whole different gedank, Rabbi Yisai. It's a whole different story. The way the Chazon Ish is learning the Ramah, which is the way he's learning the Rosh, is v'nogu, is this is the right thing to do. Is the right thing to do. And Lamaisa, so what do I do? So I guess if the Jew calls me from Bnei Brak, I ask him, you're from Bnei Brak? He tell me, yeah. No, the Chazon Ish said maybe you shouldn't even be machmir. Now, Baisa, I want to tell you that Ad Kan, it's how it's written in many svarim. They say it's the Bir Halacha. Bir Halacha says yes to, they say the Mishnah Berurah says to be machmir. The Chazon Ish says not to be machmir. In the svarim, it's a little bit confusing. Shulchan Aruch says yeah to be machmir. And Svardim seem to have a minhag not to be machmir. I tell you, Rabbi, something very interesting. I'm a simple guy. Maybe I don't learn Bir Halachas. I learn Mishnah Berurahs. Bir Halachas are very hard. No, if the Mishnah Berurah writes to me the words ayin Bir Halacha, so then it's a mitzvah l'shmoya to the Divrei Chachamim. That's a mitzvah l'shmoya to the Mishnah Berurah, and I would look at a Bir Halacha that the Mishnah Berurah tells me to look at. But me, I'm just trying to get Pashup Pshat and get my head over water, especially in Reish Nun Gimel, which is like the hardest simonim in the Gan 697 simonim of the Mishnah Berurah. So over here, I'm a simple guy. I read the Ramah, I read Mishnah Berurah, I turn to my Chavrusa, I tell him, you understand? He says, yeah. So okay, let's just chazer. So it comes out that the Ramah says Nogu L'Hakel, and therefore we always do like the Ramah, like all over Gan 697 simonim of the Mishnah Berurah. The Shulchan Aruch says one way, the Ramah says another way. So Nogu L'Hakel. So I guess this Friday night, I don't want to keep on a hot plate, so I'm just going to put my food in. I'll make sure it's a half cooked. I'm not getting involved a half a third. I'll make sure it's a half a cook. And Shalom Al Yisrael. My Chavrusa said, don't you think there's a makom to be machmir like the Chachamim? I'll say, why would I think such a thing? The Mishnah Berurah, if there would be a makom to be makel, would have told me. So me and my Chavrusa, we go weiter. Then we get to Reish Nun Tes. Reish Nun Tes, the sugis you learning, Rabbi Yisai, the the sugis in the whole Hilchos Shabbos. Reish Nun Gimel, Dalid, then it's going to come a Chazorah, Hatmana, Reish Nun Zayin, Ches. At the end of Reish Nun Tes, before the Mishnah Berurah goes into the easy sugis already of Knesset Shabbos, Adlokas Neiris, Gishmakas sugis, Mishnah Berurah over here gives a sikum, a pashut summary of all that came out, basic, because I've been learning this with my Chavrusa for such a long time, and now it gives you a basic summary of everything you learned in Shia Chazara, just like in one page, you should know what to do. So Avada over there, the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell me halacha l'maisa. No, I read my Mishnah Berurah over there in Siman Reish Nun Tes. And over there, the Mishnah Berurah tells me, in the special Kamachal Ben Drusai, if the food is cooked, a third, a half, he says, Chatzi Bishul, Yeshar Mim Shlish, mutter to leave it on an open flame. And even without garfikatim. I turn to my chavrusa, I say, oh, good, you see, this is what we spoke about 6 weeks ago, that when you have food which is half cooked, as Ashkenazim, nothing to discuss. You don't see, over here is a sikum. He should have said, lichatchila, make sure it's mitzamik v'ralai, or don't leave it on an open flame ever. If it's mitzamik v'yafalai, make sure it's always garfikatim. You see over here, Mishnah Berurah Paskins like the Ramah, and he doesn't even tell me a toiv la'achmer. What do you see from all this, Rabbi Yisai? You see that the Sefer Mishnah Berurah is telling you l'chayra that the Ramah is halacha l'maisa. And you know what, Rabbi Yisai? If you read the Bir Halacha, I'm not sure exactly. Mishnah Berurah didn't tell me go look in the Bir Halacha number 1. Mishnah Berurah is telling you, listen, I'm going to tell you how to learn the Rosh. The Mishnah Berurah never says the words that the Das Torah says, mutav sheishoigig in value mezidim. He never says those words. He says to you, if you look, maybe he learned like the Chazon Ish, the same type of idea, that really, Bemis, there's lots of Rishonim. So really, if there's lots of Rishonim, why not be Mekel? Why not be Machmir? And on that, the Rosh says, because they're Adik and Reinik Shabbos, they're not going to listen to us. He doesn't mean they're not going to listen to us and it's Mutav Sheishaygi. He means they're not going to listen to us because it's going to come out that they're not going to have hot food and they're not going to have Geshmak of food. But says the Bir Halacha, this is the fight between the Bir Halacha and the Chazon Ish. At this point, the Chazon Ish says, so therefore don't be Machmir, because all the Goyim weren't Machmir based on this Cheshbon. On that, the Bir Halacha says, but if you find the one guy who's willing to be Machmir, and he says, I'm not so worried about the Oynik Shabbos, and I will have Geshmaka food and whatever. So then, yes, he should be Machmir, because you see that the thought process is in general, if a person can be Machmir with the Shitas that are Machmir, should be Machmir. Just here, Klal Yisrael weren't willing to accept it because it was a danger and a risk. Maybe it'll infringe on the Oynik Shabbos. That's the fight in the Chazon Ish and the Bir Halacha. Not that the Bir Halacha is saying it's Mutav Sheishayigim and you're doing the wrong thing. He's telling you, like he says, it's a toiv li zoyer, bevadai toiv li zoyer. He doesn't say ein limchais. He doesn't say it's a right thing, it's a nice thing, etc. But if you want to know what's the psak of the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah's psak is like the Ramah, and it's mutter. That's the psak, like the Chazon Ish. The whole machlekes is that is there an Indian to be machmir? Chazon Ish seems to say like there's not even an Indian to be machmir. The Bir Halacha definitely says there's an Indian to be machmir. Are you going to ask? I brought the diak of the Das Torah, V'nogu. You know, it's interesting. This V'nogu is not V'nogu Ha'am. You know, V'nogu Ha'am sounds like, the Welt, the Olam is Mekel. Over here, it's V'nogu. So, Yesh Lodin Harbe, in our case, going back to our case, excuse me, I also wonder, maybe the opposite. You go back to our case, and he asked me on a Friday night, I don't want to leave the hot plate on the whole Shabbos. I don't want to leave the crockpot on the whole Shabbos. And this, that. I just want to keep the food in the oven on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, and it's mitzvah v'yafalai type food. So, yesh ladin harbe, if he has to be machmir, he has a reason he doesn't want to be machmir. It's going to bother his Einik Shabbos, maybe that the kitchen is going to be hot. The Chazon Ish is mekel, the Aruch HaShulchan is mekel, and the Mishnah Berurah is mekel. Because the Ramah is mekel. The Bir Halacha brings a chumrah. Me, myself, I want to do like the chumrah of the Bir Halacha. But if someone's going to ask me, am I doing something wrong? So then you have to tell them you're not doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. Now, it's interesting, though. I will tell you that you could be moisif one nekuda. It could be the Svardim that were accepting the minig is like I mentioned before, the minig of the Ramah. Maybe they accepted it because, like I mentioned before, it was very difficult with coals and barbecues and this. Today, there's a very simple eitzah. Just put on a blech. So maybe today it could be everyone will agree. It's an easy thing. Just put on a blech. And once you put on a blech, everything is mutter. If the food is not cooked, fully cooked, third cooked, 10th cooked, who cares? Once you do such an easy thing. So now I can really hear a taina. Why get involved in the ganze shaila? It's the easiest thing in the world to just put on a blech and then everybody's happy. The chachamim, everybody's happy. The only one that wouldn't be happy with what I just said is the Chazon Ish, because we're going to see that the Chazon Ish doesn't consider our blech to be a blech. In Bnei Brak, if you're going to consider our blech to not be a blech, you're going to have to come on to this kula. Otherwise, you're going to have a big problem every single Shabbos. Maimar Muzgar, and I say it mamish b'maimar Muzgar. It's true that al pi halacha, once you take a blech and you put it on the fire, then everybody's happy with you. Even if the food is not cooked, yet cooked, fully cooked, third cooked, doesn't make a difference, because now we'll see why. That we didn't learn the sugya, but for some reason, a blech is considered a ketuma. It's considered something that lessens the heat, and it's considered a modern day ketuma. We'll talk why, Bez Hashem. But you should know one thing. Rav Henkin, Zichron Levracha, used to warn people, always make sure that the food is fully cooked. Nothing to do with our sugya. Because if the food is not fully cooked before Shabbos, nothing to do with Chananya Chachamim. Bein Chananya, you don't need fully cooked. And Bein the Chachamim, fully cooked doesn't help. He was saying a practical thing. If the food is not going to be fully cooked before Shabbos, you're going to run into a problem. They're going to lift off. Sometimes we get a little bit like, curiosity, which there's a bunch of dead cats because of that. You'll look up what's going on inside, and now the food is not fully cooked. And then you quickly close the lid. You took it from going third cooked, half cooked, 80% cooked, 100% cooked. That's a Shaila Bishul Deraisa. And also you move the cholent and you move things on the blech and you move it closer to the fire. So Rav Henkin said, because of that, in general, it's better to have food fully cooked on Erev Shabbos. Nothing to do with our sugya, even if you have a blech. But al kaponim, that's borer that today, because we have a blech, it's a lot easier. So for sure, you should try to get the sheet of the chachamim lefi the bir halacha. Why not? Why not? But my case was, he had an oven that he doesn't want to leave on his blech the whole Shabbos, his hot plate and fire and this and that. And sometimes people are nervous. So then you got to tell him that Medina, it's mutter once it's a half cooked or a third cooked, it's mutter Medina, as long as it's going to get cooked. Since it's going to get cooked by Shabbos, Medina, it's mutter. And the Bir Halacha says it's a nice thing, it's a toiv lechatchila to be machmer. L'chayra. That's number one. Now, by say, it's very late. Very late. I want to just start the next part of the sugya, which really is a continuation of this shaila, and in the sugya at least, is that, okay, look, I just came out that I have my lechatchila, perhaps lefi the Bir Halacha, I want to go and do something and not be saimech on Chananya. I want to go and do a ketuma. Today, you start taking ashes and sprinkle it on your stovetop. Your stovetop is not going to react, or it might react. You want to go and do some type of a ketuma, a grufa on your oven. How do we do this? How do we apply what was going on back then to today? Now, I'm not going to be able to go into it out of sight. So instead, I'm going to learn in the sugya now, so a big shaila, which I want to get started in Mitzvah Shem. Maybe we'll come back to it, maybe next week. The shaila zazay. The shoyel in the Igros Moshe really opened up the shaila, but at this point, I'm learning the Igros Moshe, Rabbi say, not so much now for the halacha l'maisa of the Igros Moshe, but more as the sugya of the Igros Moshe, how we learned our sugya, like a rishon. The Moshe over here asks the shaila on our ovens, which is megala, tremendous yisoid in this topic. The Moshe asks the shaila, this is Rabbi say, a new topic, which in Yitzhak Hashem, I'm going to connect in I don't know if this week, but we're going to connect. We have about 8 minutes. Let's at least start the Indian. Ramosha asked, the Shayil at least asked on a Shayil on our stoves. We know that we learned the sugya, and we see that there's something called a tanner, and a tanner is chamoi rav. It's very, very hot, and it doesn't work roof of a ketuma. And his question, the Shayil's question was, what's our stovetops, our ovens, are they chamoi rav? Seems to be there's a fire and whatnot. Are they called chamoi rav? And therefore, a roof of a ketuma won't work. So Ramosha goes on to explain a tremendous yisoid, and he asks a gavaldik kasha, which is a very, very sugya opening kasha. Ramosha asks the kasha, what's going on over here? We're saying that a tanner is chaymai rav, is boiling hot, and therefore a groove of a ketuma doesn't work. So Ramosha asks the kasha that l'chayra, why not? Rabbi say, what's the lumdus of groove of a ketuma? So we see the Mishnah Berurah, and this is really how, we'll see, this is basically how the place can go to halacha. The lumdus is hesach hadas. I'm showing, like we mentioned last time, and again, I'm going to reiterate this. We're going to see that over here, when we say heker, it's not the conventional terminology of heker. Most Rishonim, and certainly the Mishnah Berurah goes, it's hesach hadas. It's, I am showing that I'm out of the cooking process. You see, I'm sprinkling ashes. You see, I'm taking out the coals. I'm not in the cooking process. If you're showing us you're not in the cooking process, we're not afraid you're going to stoke the coals. So, Frank Moshe, so what's going on? I'm sprinkling coals on my tanner. I'm not in the cooking process. I'm shoveling out. Let it be boiling. What's the difference? I'm clearly not showing, I'm doing an action which shows that I'm not in the cooking process. Why is it not enough? So it says Rav Moshe an incredible yesod. And Rav Moshe, Kedarkai, was Mekavin, there's a Prima Godim like this, who says this in the HaRav Sivkot and Ches. There's an Aruch HaShulchan in Sivkot and Vav that seems to say this idea. Rav Moshe says that in those days, at least, a tanner was something that was so hot that sometimes even during the cooking process, they would do grufa v'ketuma because they didn't want the food to burn. So sometimes even when they were cooking, they would sprinkle on some ashes or they would shovel out some ashes because it was so hot. What's the lumdis of grufa v'ketuma? The lumdis is it shows I'm not in the cooking process. No, it doesn't. Many times you could be in the cooking process and you could sprinkle on it and you could shovel out because fakert, you don't want it to burn the food, but it doesn't show that you're not in the cooking process. So that's why it's not exeris akosiv. Grufa v'ketuma doesn't work by HaRav of a tanner. No, there's a lumdis. If it's something that I do during the cooking process, then that shows I'm not out of the cooking process. Now, by say, there's a moira dika prima godim. The Prima Godim says the same kasha that the oilam has to ask on the sugya, and he says the same type of a kasha and gives the same exact teretz. He has a kasha. What's worse, a tanner or a katma v'hovara? We know there's a sugya that says katma v'hovara. If you sprinkled on the ash, on the coals, and then it flared up again, you're still allowed to do SHIHIYA. That's how we paskin. We have to find some modern day example of this. But if you sprinkled the coals and then it flared up again, we don't say, oy vey, that's flared up, you can't be shoya. Why not? Why not? And I'll ask the question even more. By a tanner, is it different? What's the difference? I see a fire there and I see a fire there. How could katma v'hovara be better than a gorif or a katim tanner? All right, the tanner is boiling hot, it's true, but there's ashes on it. Here, it's a regular fire and the ashes are all gone because the fire flared up. So how does it work? Katma v'hovara. So the Prima Godim says, mamish tisisai. He says, the lumdis of ketuma is hesach hadas. So I showed already myself, not somebody else. It's not a hecker that you're showing somebody else. I've shown myself I'm not in the cooking process because I did something which no one does when he's in the cooking process. So the fact that it flared up again, who cares? We don't need a hecker. We need to know, are you in the cooking process? So I sprinkled it. I showed done with the cooking process. Oh, as Ibezai says, the Prima Godim, Masha Ein came by a tanner. Since this is something, mamish like Rav Moshe, since this is something that you do when you're in the cooking process, because you don't want the item to burn. So even when you are cooking, sometimes you're going to sprinkle on, but that doesn't show anything. And the Aruch HaShulchan says the same thing. Says Rav Moshe, and again, I'm using this as case study, says the Kohen Rav Moshe, as Ibezai, take a blech, take a piece of metal. You want to know, are our ovens, our stovetops? You want to know, are they considered tanner HaRav? Says Rav Moshe, who cares? Let them be boiling hot. But it's not exeris akosiv that you can't do something to show you're out of the cooking process. Says Rav Moshe, go and do something that shows you're not in the cooking process on a stovetop. For example, put down a piece of metal. When I'm cooking and I want something not to burn, what do? I put down a piece of metal? No, I turn the fire lower, right? So over here, what did I do? I took a piece of metal and I do something to show I'm no longer cooking. What am I doing? I'm just keeping things warm. But this is not something that people do in the cooking process. As Ibezai says, Rav Moshe, therefore a blech would work today. A blech is a modern day ketuma. Now, Ibezai, the shaila is that this go inside my oven. Now that you understand the blech, is it enough to take a piece of metal and put it down on a rack? What did you do? Did you make the oven any less hot? You didn't make the oven any less hot by taking a piece of metal and putting it down on a rack. What goes on in an oven, Rabbi Isai? In an oven, there's a thermostat. What's the word of the thermostat? The fire is on. It's the same fire. When you put the oven on 350, it stays on the fire until it takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It says, I'm at 350. Maybe it gets to 380. And then it says I could stop because I'm at 350. let's say you put the oven on to 450. So then the fire that was on originally just keeps on going until it gets to 450. And then it stops. And then it goes back until it gets to that point. Whether it's electric, whether it's the old ones, those we'll talk about.
No, that's how oven works.
But
Back and
now,
forth.
let's clear. I take a piece of metal and I put it inside my oven on the floor of the oven or something like that. Is that going to do anything to make the heat of the oven less? Avada not. So then that wouldn't be able to be considered a ketuma. But maybe I can have an eitzah. And maybe this is the eitzah of the Goyin Rav Moshe. Maybe I'll take an insert. I'll make a 4-sided matziv, 5-sided, whatever, insert. Now, what's going to happen when I make an insert? Think a minute, Rabbi Isai. Where's the thermostat? The thermostat is measuring the heat. Usually it's between the wall and the insert. Now, Rabbi Isai, modern day ovens might be different, and I'm going to talk about it. Right now, it's just a case study to understand in the lumdus. At least in the time of Moshe, this was the reality. It says, now I have an insert. So what's going to happen? It's going to, for sure, everyone remembers in Pesach, it was very hard to cook in those days. What's going to happen is your 450 is going to think it's 450 very, very early because the heat is all concentrated right there. So when I put in an oven insert, what am I doing? I'm being mafchis the choim. I'm lessening the choim, and it is not something I'm doing an action of lessening the choim that no one does when he's in the cooking process. So that would certainly work, says the Goyin Rav Moshe. That would certainly work. Now, by side, this is Agdama into this very big sugya, at least this chalik of the sugya. And Amit Hashem, Bez Hashem, we'll continue next time. But this time we saw the Goysa Machlekes Chananya and the Chachamim. This is, do we paskin like the Chananya? The Ashkenazim seem to yes paskin, the Mishnah Berurah even seems to paskin like that. But there is a chumrah, at least in the rest of the world, chutz from Bnei Brak, it seems to be there's not even a chumrah. Why is it that in Bnei Brak, they don't have that chumras because they don't have, why is it that they can't be soy with that chumras because they don't have a blech? But once we see from Rav Moshe that we can have a blech because we're doing something to show we're not in the cooking process by putting down that piece of metal. So we don't need to be relying on that kula of Chananya. But my other case, inside the oven, maybe we do need to rely on Chananya. Okay, Rabbi Yisai.
How do I talk here? What? No. Okay, Rabbi Sai, can anybody? I
just want to say Shalom Aleichem to the Olam, the live Olam. I could see them for a moment, so I could give them one big Shalom Aleichem. Or I can't see them.
Can't see them. Rhinus Kallus. What happened to Rabbi? Is that your hair? You still there? Yeah, Rhinus Kallus. Rhinus and Nishma. Can you hear me?
I hear everyone.
Okay, so Yashikayach, yeah, we are here, and
I don't see anyone though.
You don't see? Okay, I don't know where. Maybe this video is off.
Let's
no, anyway, we're gonna have to figure out a way to improve the technology. But Yashikayach for the beer in the Igros Moshe and Mitzvah, as you said, we'll go weiter next week. Okay, everybody, say tonight at 8:30 there will be a Chazara Shir, and we will try to.